Well, it's that time again. Welcome to the weekly discussion of how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. This is the Fill in the Blank podcast, and I'm Ross Strader. I'm joined by my co-host, Keith Abels. You can follow us on Twitter at AskFITB, or you can email us, fitbpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Love for you to join the conversation. Keith, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. This is a milestone episode.
It is a milestone episode. Tell us what that is.
Episode 20. You know, over the course of the last week, I multiple times said, I need to look up to find out what the 20th anniversary is. I know it's not 20 years.
Right.
But what what you give for 20.
Yes.
And I've had a week to do that, and I have not done that. Do you have any idea? Because I don't.
Well, it's platinum, isn't it?
Is it beer? Because
it could be beer.
I packed a little cooler for our show tonight.
Yes, it is. You could imagine.
Maybe it's aluminum?
Yeah, aluminum. There you go. It's aluminum. Actually, I think it's platinum.
Platinum.
Is
what
the I have no idea. Platinum gifts. I'm short on knowledge of platinum gifs, but there you go.
Not terribly important, but this is a big episode for us. So
it is. It's a milestone, and not only that. I mean, we've had over the last 20 episodes, people have come along to join that journey, and so how can people continue to do that?
So we appreciate everyone's support on Patreon, and if you are new to the show, welcome, and you can support us at patreon.com/FITB. So the cool thing about Patreon is it lets you, the listener, decide how much our show is worth to you. So we have a simple challenge out to all of our listeners, and that is $1 per month. So if you're able to contribute just $1 a month, that's only 3 cents a day. That goes a long way in helping support our show in the form of growing our audience and also helping us with our next big upgrade, which is upgrading our audio equipment. So patreon.com/FITB, patreon.com/FITB is where you go to accept that dollar challenge and begin supporting the show. So thank you for listening to the show and supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/FITB.
So at episode 20, I remember in the first couple of episodes, we were just excited. There were downloads beyond just you and I. And then it moved beyond you and I and our circle of friends. And we had some regional downloads, and then we had some, we crossed state lines and were in most all the states in the United States. But Keith, since then, it wasn't too long until this podcast went international, and you have some update for that.
I do, and every time I look at our stats, I don't look at them necessarily every single week, but it's been a few weeks since I checked in, and of course our show is the most popular with U.S. listeners because that's where we are. Mm-hmm. But I'll just give you an update on the countries where people have listened to our show. So the United States, of course, Germany, Sweden, the U.K., Japan, and India. Those are the ones we've mentioned on previous episodes. And since our last international update, we've gained some more listeners in other countries. Denmark, Mexico, Austria, Mauritania. I'll come back to that one in just a minute. The Czech Republic and Lithuania. So I believe it's 12 countries overall that we're listened to. And we actually broadcast on Spotify as well. And Spotify does their data a little differently. So there are a couple of South American countries that technically we've got some downloads in. I need to go back and check that because those are broken out separately. Let me come back to the Mauritania. I'm a little embarrassed, but until I saw that on our stats, I had never heard of this country.
I hadn't heard of it either. No.
So Mauritania is a country in Northwest Africa. And so I did a little Wikipedia search, and they've got, 4.5-ish million people. Most of the country is part of the Sahara. And so anyway, I learned a lot about Mauritania, and I learned one other thing as well.
What's that?
On the Wikipedia page, you know how it has the kind of phonetic pronunciation of the country?
Yes.
It also has a little link there where you can push it and it will just say the name. It's got like an audio link where if you're not sure how to say it, it will just say it for you. I did not know that was in there.
So did you say it right? I mean, did you have it right?
I did. Actually, I did. I did.
Cool.
But the reason I pressed it, I thought, well, here's the way it looks, to me, or here's the way it kind of sounds in my head. But, you could be putting the emphasis on the wrong part of the word or whatever.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, I wasn't. So Wikipedia, thank you.
Man, right on. Does it say by any chance what the language of Mauritania is?
It does. The official language is Arabic.
Okay. All right. Not that this show, to our knowledge, is being translated into Arabic, but
Yet.
yeah, as far as I know.
Yet.
Yes, yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, that's right. So you just never know. You never know. You have full freedom to translate this.
Exactly. We're episode 20, 12 countries into it, all over the U.S., and I can't tell you how excited I am. Number one, that we stuck with it for 20 weeks, and number two, that we have that many listeners in that many places around the world. So if you think about what we do to broadcast our show and distribute our show, this stuff didn't exist that long ago. And so that kind of gets into our topic tonight, where technology, just kind of basic technology these days, opens up an entirely new world for a lot of people. And so for us, that's certainly given us an audience that there's no way we could have reached before. And to me, that's just very exciting. And it's a fun little side project that you and I do for fun, but is also turned into, I think, something a little larger than that, and will continue, hopefully, if things go well, into even more things. So I'm super happy about the Fill in the Blank podcast and our partnership here over the last 20 weeks. So I did pack a little cooler. I wasn't kidding, for our show tonight, mainly because I don't have time to go get a beer during the show. So you can't see me, but I'm raising a glass to the Fill in the Blank podcast.
Yes.
So
cheers to the Fill in the Blank podcast. But mostly cheers to the audience. And so here's the deal. We'd love to know where you're from. We'd love to know that you're listening. So find us on Twitter at AskFITB. We'd love for you to follow us. It is a neglected Twitter account, really, but we have plans to increase our visibility on Twitter. But in the meantime, as soon as you send us a tweet, we get that information. We'd love to communicate back, or send us an email, fitbpodcast@gmail.com, and we'd love to email back with you and know where you're from and what you think of the show and the things that you'd like for us to talk about as we consider how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. And so, Keith, speaking of that, this is an interesting topic, and I think it's one of those that if you are an international listener, you may find it interesting. So we're going to be talking about the workplace. We're going to primarily be talking about the workplace in America, how technology has affected the workplace, and the increased reality that workers are mobile, that in much of the occupations that we have now, there is opportunity to do mobile work. So your email comes to your laptop, or it comes to your smartphone, or that you're able to take calls while you're driving down the road. You're not tied to a desk so much for your productivity as you have been in the past. And yet, how has that affected us? Has that been a good thing? Has it been a bad thing? I think there's probably some of both. And so we'd like to explore that topic. But I think in the midst of that, there are also some things related to an American work culture, sort of the American work values, that are different than the rest of the world.
Yeah, so this topic kind of opens up, really. I mean, you could go anywhere with this topic. So you mentioned the good, you mentioned maybe what are some of the unintended consequences of this, and then there's a very specific component of this is when you introduce a mobile workplace, or an incredibly flexible work environment, and apply that to the kind of American cultural experience as it relates to work, that kind of leads you down a different path than maybe some other countries. So let's start with the good stuff.
Yeah, let's do.
I think that's a good place to start, right? So, what are some of the benefits of the technology that we have today as it applies to how work gets done? And certainly, people are more mobile. And so that means you can be where you need to be instead of being tied to a specific location. And I think it's kind of obvious why that's a benefit. That would allow you a lot more flexibility with location, right? So that could mean that you live in one state and work in another. It could mean you live in one country and work in another. Or that could just mean that, you can take your kids to school and kind of work from wherever, instead of somebody else having to take your kids to school, if that's important to you, or whatever the case may be. So being mobile is a very big deal, and that also gives you just flexibility with how you're actually working while you're mobile. So you're not in a cube farm, right? You're not one of 1,000 cubicles, just a bunch of gray little cubicle walls on a big floor somewhere. So it opens up a lot. And so for me, that's liberating. And I am fortunate enough to be one of those employees where I'm technically classified by my company as what they call a flex worker. And that means I kind of work from anywhere. And so I've seen the benefit of that over the last, say, 15 years or so. And I'm extremely fortunate to have that.
So
what about you?
Well, yeah. So let me ask you though, real quick, and I'll tell you all about sort of my journey. But so 15 years ago, when you entered the industry you're in or the type of work you're in, did you enter as a flex employee, or is that something that came about somewhere in that process?
No, I did not enter as that type of employee. So over the course of job changes, so, being either promoted or kind of working your way up through an organization, which is what, most people do in large companies like mine. And then the introduction of technology that made that possible.
Yeah.
So if I were doing the job that I have today 20 years ago, then there would certainly be more of a need for me to be anchored at a specific location, not because of the nature of the job, but because of the nature of the technology that kept you anchored to a specific location and did not give you the freedom to do a lot of what I do from the road. And that's, thanks to high-speed wireless connectivity, right? So it was 2G, then 3G, then 4G, and soon to be 5G. And every advancement there radically changes what you're able to do from a mobile device.
Yeah.
Mobile devices just in general, with smartphones becoming truly smart. At one point, the early versions of smartphones, let's be honest, they weren't that smart.
No.
We called them that, but they weren't that. Just like we called high-speed internet, it really wasn't that high-speed internet, right?
No, that's right.
And so, and every time, every iteration of those things and every kind of generational advancement of whether it's smartphones or wireless speeds or whatever, then it truly kind of makes a big leap forward. And it's like, oh, those old phones weren't smartphones. These are smartphones. And every generation, they get a little smarter, or it gets faster. And so each time you have those advancements, then it certainly makes that working environment a lot easier to do remotely, or, just in a way that you didn't have to, or that you couldn't before because you were just tethered to a specific location.
Yeah. So let's break it down for a minute. So when you started, you had a primary location that you would, let's call it, you'd go into work. And so you'd be there. There was an expectation of a time you'd be there. There was an expectation of a time that you could leave. Your team, I guess, the people that you interacted with, employees and coworkers, were generally, I guess, in the same location or proximity. And so your communication with them was much more face-to-face or landline phone, a phone that sat on your desk, things like that. Is that correct?
It is, and not just the people that were on the team that I worked on, but all of the support around that too.
Yeah.
Right. So I work for a very big company, and I typically don't talk a lot about my day job on our show because I keep those two worlds very separate. But I do work for a really big company. And, so in those large companies, you have your primary role and then the team that you work on. And then you've got these layers of support that you need that kind of support everything else that you do. And so that support, is also very close, right? So maybe it's in the next office over, maybe it's around the corner, maybe it's on another floor, maybe it's on the building 2 blocks down, but you still have that proximity compared to now where, everybody's just kind of out.
Yeah.
Right. Out and about. And then so the way that you communicate is, it is extremely different today than it was 15 years ago.
It is different. So I know, even 15 years ago, we had email and people utilized email. We probably socially have changed how we use email in the workplace, and how, I think everybody's streamlined it. We've learned a new set of rules about email and how it works. But you add to that, now, for instance, I understand you probably have a work phone that's dedicated to work, and so texting becomes one of those ways that you communicate. And so there's a lot of real-time communication now that wasn't really available 15 years ago. A lot of people, let's be honest, some people texted, but most people, that wasn't a part of their work life, their work day. that real-time communication during the day with individuals or teams of individuals that you worked with?
No, it was email.
Yeah, it
I
was
mean,
email.
email was it. And I mean, there was no like inter-office memo or
Right.
anything like that. But I mean, it was email.
Yeah. And people called you on a phone that was,
Right.
on your desk, and you had a old voicemail, I'm sure, right?
Yep. Yep.
Where people dialed into a central number, and then they pushed an extension, and then that extension, they either got you or they got a voicemail or something like that. And
Oh, they always got voicemail. I'll be
Yeah.
honest with you. They never got me.
yeah, and so I don't know about you, but like for me, in the last 15 years, my transition has gone from having a desk in an office, and then in that office having then a lot of the tools that I needed. So a lot of what I do end up doing research and writing and things like that. So I had shelves of books and filing cabinets and all kinds of things. Had a secretary, a whole nine yards. And those iterations have changed to where the first thing to go was my dependence upon the tools that were in my office, because those tools became available on a laptop computer. And so now I'm able to take all the things I need anywhere I go. The second iteration was the need for, I don't even have a phone on a desk anymore because it's not a place anybody would call me. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I'm not tied to a specific location to be found by the people that need to find me. They can reach out by an email. They can send a text. Meetings happen in a coffee shop or, various locations that I don't need to be in a certain spot for people to show up and find me. And that's made a huge difference to the degree that I don't really have an office at my workplace anymore.
Yeah, I have a landing spot when I go in.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of a workspace, but it is not the singular defined little space that I once had that was mine and mine only.
Yeah.
That I went to every day and did my work at.
In some places, going into work is not the place that I do work anymore. It's the place we go if we have to have face-to-face meetings. It's a place to go if you have to have a one-on-one with somebody. It's a place to go to make sure, from my standpoint, keep a pulse on the culture and the vibe of things that are going on. But it is not the place of, productivity for me. As you think about sort of traditional productivity.
It's really not. It's interesting that you say that. It really isn't. It is a place for. I think you got it right. It's a place for kind of personal interaction.
Yeah.
So interacting with either coworkers or your team or whatever. But so that's kind of replaced what happens there for me. And I hadn't really thought about it that way until you mentioned that. But most of my actual work gets done somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, so
that's a good point.
There's also been a change for me, and I'm sure for you and for many, many folks, is you've gone from what seemed like a fairly structured environment to an environment that is increasingly less structured. So your days, if you thought about it, you go back 15 years, 20 years ago, your days were probably, in many ways, more predictable than they are now, less flexible than they are now. You knew, hey, when I arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning or 7:30 in the morning, I've got these certain things to do, and you had your desk set up for it, and then you knew, you'd run into these certain people, and, you had an expectation of what you'd get done before lunch. You'd maybe take a lunch appointment, come back, and you knew what your environment was going to be like during the day as you planned. As things become less structured, you end up having to fight to build some structure back in so that your day doesn't get away from you or your week doesn't get away from you, and the things that you've got to get done, they actually get done.
Yeah, so that brings up a point. So the downfall of having a defined period of work time, right? So if you just take 8 to 5, is people aren't productive in that kind of way. So you aren't equally productive hour to hour between the hours of 8 and 5. people are productive in spurts.
Yeah.
And that is very true for me. And I'll be honest with you, my productive spurts are typically later in the day, not earlier in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So early in the day for me is kind of task-oriented time. Just like the stuff that would be on a checklist.
Yeah.
Right? So just like, I just got to cross these things off or check these things off. But then the things that require thought and planning and more attention and focus, those things are later in the day for me.
Yeah.
But that's just for me. So for you, it may be different. For other people, it may be even different, even more different than that. And so my point is that you can see why so many people are just kind of checked out at work, because that's not necessarily either they're not interested, which is certainly the case for a lot of people, but for people that even enjoy their jobs and are go to work at the same time every day and kind of work the same kind of shift every day, that may not be the most optimal time for them to be doing that work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the danger of having a one size fits all work day, whether that's 8 to 5 or whether you work the night shift or whatever the case may be. That's just not going to work for everybody. I think finally companies are coming around to that in the jobs where it's okay to be flexible, because not every job can be flexible at this point.
Yeah.
But for the jobs where you do have that flexibility, I think companies are finally starting to come around to the fact that people are going to be very productive in these spurts. And so if you've ever pulled an all-nighter because your brain just works better, I don't think that that's just people being lazy. I think that people just work better in these spurts.
Yeah,
and
I absolutely think so.
Combined with them also being lazy, making that spurt at the last minute.
Sure.
But my point is that you have these bursts of productivity, and then you just need to chill for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so the flexibility hopefully allows those types of workers to figure that out on their own. But the downside of that is they're on their own to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And not everybody can handle that responsibility. I've seen plenty of people over the years who have transitioned from a very defined work environment to a flexible work environment, and they don't get anything done. Yeah. And within a few months, they're gone, right? Because they just can't work in that environment. So it's not for everybody.
No, it's not. And I think there's a particular challenge for those, like in our peers that have lived through the transition of workplaces and environments and even work days that were defined and came with lots of structure. And we have lived through a transition where that structure ends up being gone. Those boundaries of how you spend your time, those get erased. And now everybody ends up having to be their own boss to some degree. Everybody has to be their own, coach to some degree. And you're left to figure out, I've got these things to do. I need to get them done. I need to do them in a way that's excellent and professional, that, still collaborates in the best possible way with the teams that I work with. And yet, a lot of those systems or structures or infrastructures that used to be there to keep people on track and accountable, those are gone. So now everybody has to be their own boss, their own coach. So Keith, if you're coaching somebody, you're coaching
Mm-hmm.
somebody, either they're making the transition or they're coming in and all they've ever known is a flexible, work environment. How would you coach somebody about how to take the technology they have, how to structure that, how to, do you multitask? Do you not multitask? How do you set priorities and work through priorities? How important is it to communicate with people during the day? And so how would you coach somebody along those lines?
So the first thing, you have to understand what your job is.
Yeah.
So, you have to define what are you trying to accomplish in your current role. And that is usually defined by somebody that's not you, right?
Sure.
So your boss or your company or, your board or whoever, you report to is, typically going to kind of quantify your output and put time parameters around it. So here's what needs to be done by this point, right? So just kind of loosely speaking,
Mm-hmm.
that basically is your job description, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yep.
Here's what you were there to do. And so you have to understand that. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to understand yourself. And what I mean by that is that, I mentioned that I have different types of work that I like to do at different times of the day for whatever reason. And I am more productive with certain things earlier in the day and other things later in the day. And so you have to understand, who you are just as a person and how you like to get things done, because that matters. If you can make those first two things I just talked about, so the requirements from your job, if you can make that kind of gel or mesh with how you like to work as an individual, then great. That's probably a great fit for you just as a worker. So you've got to do that. The other thing too is kind of understanding how your technology can help with that and how it can potentially get in the way. Sometimes we rely too much on technical solutions and not enough on just some old-fashioned things. And so that's very specific to each job and to each person. But how do you apply, what tools do you use to get your job done? Sometimes that is technology. Sometimes that's personal interaction, right? Not everything can be solved with an iPad.
Yeah.
It just can't. And that also gets back to the personal interaction. Are you a person that can thrive in isolation, or do you need a lot of contact with the outside world or other people in order to be successful? So that's a big part of it, is kind of understanding who you are. And then the final part of it is, how do you organize yourself so that you make sure you're staying on track? Because the flexibility sometimes, I think it's easy to confuse being busy with being productive.
Yes.
And so how do you measure your progress? How do you make sure that you are accomplishing the things that need to be accomplished at the right time, so that they're either due on time, or so that the level of your work is what it needs to be, or so that you're meeting your customers or your internal customers, if you work on a team, what their demands and their needs and that sort of thing. So that would be kind of where I would start with that kind of discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. One of the ways I think I've tried to coach myself, and I think I would coach other people, is also making an audit of, hey, what's the best hour of your day, and in building productivity around what's the best hour of your day. So for some people, 6 a.m., that's the best hour of their day. For some people, it's 9 a.m. For some people, it's 11 a.m. And in some ways, you've got to figure out what's the best hour of your day, and then do the things you've got to do to free yourself up, to prepare yourself to be all there in that hour or those couple of hours that you've got. Because once you can start on a project, once you can immerse yourself in what you're doing, then you can sprint longer than, you show up at, say 3 o'clock is the worst time of the day for you. That's the worst hour of the day for me for whatever reason, 3 o'clock. That is not, if I have to be productive, that's not the time I need to start working on something. That's not the place in my schedule. I've got to leave that open. And so trying to schedule things that don't require immersion, around the hours of the day that aren't best for me, and then making sure that the very best hours of the day, those are reserved for the things I need to immerse myself into work.
That makes a lot of sense. How do you do that? How do you determine what your best hour is?
Yeah, I think it's some trial and some error, So I think over the years I've discovered that for me, the very best time to take appointments or to set meetings or to be available for sort of the networking or the social aspect of what my work is, So I need to do that in the afternoons, because the mornings, those are the times where the work I need to do, that solitary work, the work that I have to do, sit in front of my computer, and I've got to, prepare something, or I've got to produce something. The mornings are the very best for me to do that. So I try not to, if I can, take meetings, take appointments, do those things during the hours that are easiest for me to immerse in work. And then in the afternoon, I can take meetings and begin to connect with other people that don't require, maybe all of my energy that it needs in the morning to do work that I immerse in. Does that make sense?
It does. So how long have you been working in, so like we're talking about these very flexible work environments.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing that?
Well, so I think it's been something that for the last 10 years has really been a transition. And I'd say about the last 5 years, is when I fully went kind of remote, sort of, so I would be what they would call a remote worker, if you will. So
Okay.
I still have a place that I land. There's still an office that supports what I do and what several of us do. But by and large, my work is remote. And so I can do it from anywhere. And I am able to set appointments anywhere that's convenient for people I need to meet. And so I'm not tied to a certain place.
Okay, so having done that for, let's call it 5 years,
Yeah.
can you imagine yourself going back to the way it used to be?
Well, no, I think that would be incredibly difficult at this point. I mean, I could do it, absolutely. I mean, I've done it before and could do it. I don't know that I would be as productive. So I think there would still be that downtime during the day in a structured environment where you looked busy and weren't getting anything done. And then I'd have to make up the time in the evenings or in the early mornings or things like that. But the idea of that there are moments that you sprint during the day to get stuff done, I think that's very realistic.
Yeah, there's no way I could do it at this point. I mean, if I had to, would I? Yes, of course. But I mean, just being honest, it would be very difficult for me to walk into or to go back to a very defined, time-bound work environment. It would, and I hate to say it'd be hard for me to have a real job because that's not true.
Yeah.
Because I do have a real job.
Sure.
But in the context of of what you thought of work as when you were a kid or growing up or even earlier in your career, that is not what I do now. It is not go to work at this time, go to lunch at this time, come back from lunch at this time, go home at that time, and then you're done. Right? It is not. And so the reason I ask that is that I think more and more people are like that, but that also comes with a potential downside. Right? So if you don't have a defined work time or work environment, then that also has a potential kind of bleed over effect to where you're always working.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's no clearly defined stopping point. So, we started off with the good stuff, which you're more mobile, you're more flexible, you can hopefully do, you don't miss a lot of things that you otherwise would have missed. You've got more freedom to kind of move about the country or whatever. And so you can kind of work from anywhere. And there's a lot of great things that come along with that. You can work from home a lot. That's great. But the downside to that is that you could end up working even more. And let's be honest, Americans already work more than any other country on earth.
Well, we do. I mean,
I don't mean that as a compliment.
No, absolutely not. I don't think that our work-life balance is one of those things that I think flexibility can very much contribute to, or it can be a huge detriment to. So you remember back in the 80s, they would talk about all the time when the idea that everybody was going to have a computer on their desk, that when computers kind of fully integrated themselves into the workplace, the prediction was, well, we aren't going to have 40-hour work weeks anymore, that our work week will become less because we'll be able to be more productive in a less amount of time. And so that seemed to be this utopia, this sort of pot at the end of the rainbow that everybody was. But that's not what happened. I mean, computers and technology entered the workplace, and you saw the work day or the work week increase, not decrease. You went 40 hours to 50 hours or to 60 hours or 60 hours to 80 hours. And people are generally working more because in some ways you're always plugged in, and we don't know how to unplug ourselves from all the things there are to do.
Well, a big part of it is habit. A big part of it is cultural with Americans specifically, because that is an American thing where we glorify work, and there is a glorification of busy.
Yeah, oh yeah.
In both work environments and non-work environments. And I got to be honest with you, that pisses me off. I'm not a fan of the glorification of busy.
No.
I'm just not. A big part of it is also smartphones. So once you started getting, work email and constant internet connectivity, it just opens up that world. And so some people, as instead of, there's a group of people that in any idle time, they'll just be on Facebook. And other people, that idle time is replaced by work email.
Yeah.
Or something work related on their on their phone, and that's not healthy. So, in the end, though, I'm as guilty of this as anybody, where I just kind of get sucked into, you kind of open an email on your phone, and then that kind of leads to another thing, which leads to another thing, which leads to another thing, and then before you know it, an hour's time is gone, and that is not my job's fault, right? There's nobody, I don't have a boss that says you need to do all of this. It's my personal responsibility. I need to say, hey, this is this is off time for me, and I think just in general, we need kind of as a society to start working on this, because I don't think that all companies, there are some companies that are, that expect you to reply to every, this on this time, doesn't matter what time I send it to you or whatever. I think more and more companies are realizing that's not the way to go, but it's become such a habit that the individual responsibility has to be there to where you clearly define, I'm done.
Yeah.
Right? I am done for the day. Not everything is super urgent all the time. One of my favorite things is when somebody sends me a message and says, this needs to be done ASAP, right? ASAP. Do you know why that's one of my favorite things?
Why?
Because they're giving you permission. They say as soon as possible. What they mean is do this immediately. But that's not what as soon as possible means.
No, that's right.
So if I turn it in next Tuesday, I can say, well, that was as soon as I could possibly do it.
Right.
Right? So ASAP, I love it. ASAP means nothing to me. ASAP has it does not speed me up. If anything, it slows me down just so that I can use the sarcastic response of, well, that was as soon as I could possibly do it. It said ASAP, and this was ASAP for me.
So let me ask you a question. Do you check your work email in the evenings? Do you answer work emails after 9 o'clock? Do you work in that sense?
Not necessarily. When I was younger, when I was, I would say maybe 10 years or so ago, I would blow people's phones up. Let me just say it like this. In the BlackBerry days, right? So this was pre-iPhone, even like Palm Trio.
Oh, yeah. I know. Yeah.
So this is BlackBerry days. I would blow up email all the time. First thing in the morning, late at night. And, I'd get responses from people and blah, blah, blah. And I realized after a while that, what I was doing was not good for me or the people I'm emailing.
Yeah.
And so I kind of crossed this, at some point I kind of crossed over into this new world of, it's not really cool to blow people's BlackBerries up at 10 o'clock at night. And I don't know how I came to that realization, or if somebody, or whatever, but I'm glad I did, because what was happening is when I sent the message at 10:30 at night, I would get responses. Mm-hmm. And then so that you get into this loop where you're like, oh, okay, well, they're up, so I can send email this late now.
Yeah.
And then what I, didn't realize at the time, I realize now that, those people may have been, these are mainly employees of mine at the time. They might have felt obligated to respond. And that's not cool, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want to have to respond at 10 o'clock at night. So I think some companies, I hope more companies adopt this, where you need to kind of expressly say that to your teams. And I say that now. If I send an email out late at night, I don't expect you to respond to it.
Right.
That was just when I could get to it. So I may still do it late at night, but I've had conversations with my team, and I don't expect, certainly my boss or anybody else, any of the support teams that kind of work around my organization, I don't expect them to respond outside of what I would call just kind of normal-ish business hours. Mm-hmm. So, and that's, I think everybody's gotten to a point where, okay, it's okay, at least with my team. I know that is not the case at all companies across the board. That is absolutely not the case. But I hope that will become more of kind of a common thing in companies, because it's just, there's just no need for that. There's nothing that urgent.
There's not, and I am surprised that there is not more, at least it's not more prevalent. I work in a Mac environment most of the time, but so you have a 10 o'clock email, it's in your mind, you think, man, I need to get this out, I need to send this email. But it's too bad that it's not easier, it's just not built in naturally to all of our email systems that, hey, I want to write this email at 10 o'clock, I want to send it, but I want to delay the send until 7 a.m. tomorrow morning,
Yeah.
So you can do that there are ways to do that, but it's not natural. It's just not naturally built into the workflows of most of our lives. But that would be Oh, I like sending emails in the evening. I like getting all of that out. Sometimes that's everything's gone quiet, the news is on in the background, and I can blow through 10 or 12 emails really quick. But with you, I would much rather see those delivered at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning,
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So, okay, so the final question here for you.
Yeah.
How do you decide when to punch out
Oh,
when there's no time clock?
that is
How do you know when you're done for the day?
Yeah, that is one of the most difficult struggles for me, not always feeling like, kind of that work's always hanging over your head. I have that feeling. And so punching out for me a lot of times is having to unplug. That means I've got to. So I'll tell you one thing. I've turned off I've turned off all notifications on my iPad. So I don't get any notifications on my iPad. I get just a handful of things that I let my iPhone notify me of. But that allows me, if I want to sit at night, shut my computer off, put my phone, on do not disturb, then I can sit and read on my iPad. And that's usually how I have to do it. I've got to unplug by pulling a book out and, spending some time reading away from devices that will alert me that stuff's coming on. So for me to unplug, I've got to be away from the distraction of work pinging me or alerting me that something's come in. How about for you?
Well, I've gotten to the point where I've gotten much better about just saying I'm done. Like,
Yeah.
it just, to myself and then also to my family. There's a lot of times where, the last part of my day, I'm just at home.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I may come home or I may work from home the whole day. Most of the time I'm kind of in multiple places. I'm kind of all over the place, but I may be home at, say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got a couple hours of work to do or 3 hours of work to do or whatever it is. And then I kind of define to myself and to the family that I'm done. Because if I don't, they're never quite sure.
Yeah.
And that's my fault because over the years, I've trained them to not be quite sure. Right? They're like, so at one point, they would just kind of barge in. I have an office at home. And, I say barge in, they would come in and just start talking like, I'm working. And so, the closed door on the office means I'm working. But that's just, half the time nobody's home when I get home.
Yeah.
But then they start kind of trickling in, right, as the day goes on.
Yes.
And then they just start coming in and talking. I'm like, I have my headphones in. They don't know if I'm listening to music or I'm on a conference call. And from hour to hour, it could be either of those things. Who knows? And they just start talking. And like I pull one headphone out, like, I'm on the phone.
Yeah.
Like, oh, sorry. And so but that's my fault for not, communicating that effectively. So what I have to do is say, I'm done. And I don't like come out of the office and just say, family, I'm done.
Right.
But, I do say, hey, I'm done for the day. And, that's just kind of what I do. And I probably need to be a little better at that, but I have gotten a lot better over the last couple of years at kind of announcing or defining that, yep, I'm done. I'm done working.
Yeah.
And so my transition to that is that, after I'm done working, that's family time for me. My kids are still young, 13 and 7. And so there's a lot of like dad stuff that I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, I want to make sure that I prioritize that. And so one of the most visible ways you can tell that I'm done is like, let's go outside or let's do this or let's do that because I'm interacting with kids at that point.
Yeah.
Which is a very important part, of the dad part of my life for sure.
Well, one of the ways my wife does it, and I think it's as we're talking about it, it makes a lot of sense because we all know what the sign is. But she'll change clothes at the end of the day. So when she's done, and I'm not saying she dresses up necessarily for work, but she will, part of her transition of the day out of work into just sort of being at home is she'll change clothes. No matter what it was she was wearing, just wearing shorts and a t-shirt, during the day, whatever. She'll physically change clothes as part of that transition. And that's just a way, just one of those signs to her, to everybody else that work's done and she's at home.
Well, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
One of the things that you hear a lot for people that just work at home all the time is when you get up in the morning, get dressed, right?
Yeah.
Like get dressed for the workday.
Yep.
And go to your dedicated workspace in your home.
Mm-hmm.
And so, your wife's kind of one step ahead of most people there, where, she's kind of doing the opposite thing, which is the same effect, right? So changing clothes the other way indicates that I'm off work at this point.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's brilliant. Good for her.
I know. Well, maybe I'll start doing that too. That'd be good.
You're going to change into like your formal T-shirt.
Yeah, that's
in
right.
the morning,
That's it.
and then your casual after work T-shirt when you're done.
Yeah, I have 2 drawers, one that has holes in them and ones that doesn't have holes in them, and then we can, it's easier to denote that way. Well, I think it's been a good discussion. It's certainly a discussion that I would encourage you, if you're not having in your workplace, if you're not having with your coworkers, have this discussion. When do we work? When do we not work? How do we know what work time is and isn't? It is not an easy question to solve. I think it's one of those moving targets, but it is a conversation that does need to happen more as we continue to move on into the future. We do not want to be defined by people who work more than anybody else in the world. We have to have a work-life balance. There's got to be time that we're off and unplugged and we spend time playing, or that's bad for all of us, Keith.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about blank checks. What's your blank check this week?
So I picked one that is kind of similar in theme to what our show was about.
Okay.
And it's a podcast. So normally you wouldn't say, well, hey, I want you to go listen to another podcast. But people that listen to podcasts listen to more than one.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I'm perfectly safe with the fill-in-the-blank crowd going to listen to this other podcast. It's called Free Agents. And the podcast is by David Sparks and Jason Snell. So David Sparks does the Mac Power User podcast.
Yep.
I think you've listened to that one
yeah.
for years, right? He's also a lawyer. So his primary day job is a lawyer. And then Jason Snell is the other host, and he was the writer at Macworld. He does sixcolors.com now. So he was a writer at the editor at Macworld forever, and then, a lot of magazines have, that magazine folded or at least sold or something, right? And so he was kind of out of a job there. So these guys are both now kind of independent workers. They don't work for a company. So David Sparks is an independent lawyer. Jason Snell is an independent content creator in the form of podcasts and his own website. And so the podcast, the Free Agents podcast, is about their journey as independent workers. They also have a lot of guests that have gone through that transition as well. So their little spiel, if you look at the detail of their show, says David Sparks and Jason Snell spent their careers working for the establishment. Then one day they'd had enough, or their company folded. That was me. I put that in parentheses there. Now they are independent workers learning what it takes to succeed in the 21st century. They are free agents. And so that's the kind of the intro to their show. So they have a lot of great guests, and they actually have a lot of very just practical discussions about being independent workers and how do you work from home when you've got a family? How do you bill people for the work that you do? How do you, and there's a lot of just practical discussion about being an independent worker, in addition to having a lot of guests on that have gone through this transition of either having corporate jobs, and now they're completely independent, or people that have always been independent. And so it's just a really interesting show, and there's a lot of overlap in their podcasts week to week and what we just discussed today. So if you have a chance, just go take a listen to it. Free Agents is the name of the podcast. You can get it if you're an iPhone user in the iTunes store. If you have a third-party app, then it's there too. Just go search for Free Agents. It's a great show.
Man,
highly recommend it.
Good, that's great. I think David Sparks is wicked smart.
Mm-hmm.
He's a great fun guy.
He's got a great voice too.
He does have
he's
a great voice.
He's got a very good. Like I do not necessarily have a great podcast voice. Hopefully, when we upgrade our audio equipment, we can play with that and make it sound a little better or whatever. But he's got a great podcast voice, so he's good at what he does. So speaking of podcasts, you've got a new gadget.
Yes, I do, and I'm actually anxiously awaiting for the delivery of this gadget. So it's an InnoGear microphone suspension mic clip adjustable boom. All right, so that's a mouthful. But essentially what it is, it's an arm that you can attach. So you attach to the edge of your desk, or you can attach it into the wall. And it's an arm that actually holds the microphone. So it'll hold this microphone that I use for a podcast. So right now I've got the microphone attached to a stand that sits on the desk. But it makes it difficult to move that around. I end up having to move sort of my head, my neck, my body to get to the microphone. What this does is this arm allows a maximum flexibility. I can have my computer right in front of me, bring the microphone straight down, in front of me. So I'm hoping that is something that makes my workspace a little cleaner day to day, and then certainly as we record this podcast. So we'll see. The boom arm, adjustable boom arm. We'll see how that works in the coming weeks. So next time we record this podcast, I should be on the boom arm.
So as you were saying that, you said my head, my neck, my body. I have to move it. I just had a mental image.
Yes, it's like
I just see you in this very contorted position trying to record.
Well, sometimes I find myself in this weird, So, anyways, yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah, we're not doing video yet. So, but now after the adjustable arm. We could have much more natural positioning. That's what I'm trying to say. Yes.
Excellent.
So we'll put a link into the show notes, and then next week, what we'll do is I'll take a picture of the adjustable arm, and then I'll take a picture of my current sort of workspace, and then my workspace with the adjustable arm. You'll be able to see the before and after.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, thanks for listening to the Fill in the Blank podcast. We discuss how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. And we're going to be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter at AskFITB or email us at fitbpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you thought of the show. And if you like the show, tell your friends about it. And please rate us and review us on iTunes or from wherever you're listening to this podcast. And remember, the Fill in the Blank Podcast Challenge, patreon.com/FITB. Your support goes a long way. We'll see you next week here at Fill in the Blank.